Hi guys, this is a read aloud of Teacher Tamer. If you log into commonlit.org, uh, there are some additional things on this page here that can help you with this story. One is a read aloud. You click play.
Teacher Tamer by Avi, 1994.
And stop. Okay, hide the read aloud. You can also translate and you can change your language. It has Spanish in here, Korean's in here, so there's a couple there. To translate, you go over here and you click, whoopsie, the little globe, and it will actually translate for you. I have not tested it out. I don't know how good it is, but let's do this read aloud, and hopefully this will help you guys understand the story. Okay, so this is Teacher Tamer by Avi. The whole 5th grade was engaged in silent reading. The students were reading their books while Mrs. Wessex, the teacher, sat at her desk in the front of the room, reading hers. Her book was a huge one titled Crime and Punishment. 15 minutes into the period, a large spitball landed on the middle of the page Mrs. Wessex was reading. She gasped, audibly, which means you can hear it. As the class looked up, the teacher peered down at the page to see what had landed. When she lifted her face, it was the color of chalk. That's some good figurative language. An uneasy murmur fluttered through the room. Life in the 5th grade was never good when Mrs. Wessex was angry. Lately, her anger seemed to erupt daily. A tall, big-boned woman with large hands. She had graying, curly hair and wrinkles on her face. That day, she was wearing a baggy blue dress that was also wrinkled. So this sounds like she's not a person who's really put together. She does not have expensive clothing that fits her well because she has a baggy or loose blue dress and it's all wrinkly. Nasty was the way one student described her. No one disagreed. She contemplated the class like a surgeon deciding where to cut. That's another good figurative language. So she's looking at the class. Gregory Martinez, she called, come here this instant. A hush fell upon the class as Gregory reluctantly slid out of his chair, then slumped to the front of the class, hands deep in his baggy pockets. Gregory was short for his 11 years and heavy-set, so he's overweight. His complexion, or skin, was dark, his hair black, his eyes intense, and at the moment full of worry. Though he had been in the school only a few months, everyone at the Kennedy Middle School knew he was a brain. That means he's really smart. It also means he's a new kid, only there for a few months. When Mrs. Wessex asked a question, it was always Gregory who had his hand up. More often than not, he had the right answer, too. Though Gregory liked being smart, his intelligence set him off from the other kids, so he was really different. He wanted to be liked, but they thought of him as different. Oh, there you go. Lately, however, things had begun to change. During the past 2 weeks, Mrs. Wessex had accused Gregory of various acts of misbehavior. She had gone so far as to punish him 4 times, though getting into trouble improved Gregory's class standing or his popularity. He kept insisting he was innocent. As far as he was concerned, Mrs. Wessex was picking on him. He wished he knew why. Halfway to the teacher's desk, he said, I didn't do it. Mrs. Wessex stopped him in his tracks with a hard glare. Didn't do what? She demanded. Instantly aware he had made a tactical mistake by saying anything before he was accused, he replied, I was just reading. Come over here, the teacher insisted. She pointed to a spot on the floor near her desk. Gregory drew closer. Mrs. Wessex's desk was always neat. Its uncluttered state was taken by her slovenly students as a rebuke. Ooh, lots of vocab. So if I click slovenly, it means messy and dirty, and rebuke means strong disapproval or criticism. So her kids thought that by her being neat, she was trying to criticize them or disapprove of them, like showing them up almost. So her kids really don't like her, do they? That's a very interesting. And her kids are very sloppy, but she's very neat. Interesting. Hands out of your pockets, she snapped. Gregory ripped his hands out, bringing a shower of small coins that scattered upon the floor. A burst of laughter erupted from 36 kids. Burst. That's a good onomatopoeia. Maybe like a shower of small coins. That's good figurative language too. And notice 36 kids. Wow. That's a lot of students. 101 has 30 kids. 102 has 28 kids. Can you imagine 36 for one teacher? That's a lot. Trying desperately to keep from grinning, Gregory bent over to gather up the coins. "Do that later," Mrs. Wessex shouted. She had become angrier. The classroom stilled instantly. Gregory felt his grin evaporate. As he tried to control his growing anxiety, he stared at his feet. Oh, he's getting really worried. "Do you see that?" the teacher demanded. She pointed right at her book. "Look." Gregory lifted his face. The spitball, surrounded by an expanding circle of moisture, lay upon the page. Not only did Gregory recognize the spitball for what it was, he knew that Ryan Jurgensen had shot it. Ryan, who occupied the desk right next to him, combined class bully, they call him, this is a bad word, I'm glad they bleeped that one out, but he's a wise guy, and dummy in one skinny body topped with short cropped blonde hair. So he's a bully, he's a wise guy, and he's a dummy. Ugh, goodness. Gregory doesn't seem to think very highly of Ryan, does he? He was also school spitball artist, carrying a bunch of tissues and a bunch of large plastic straws in his pockets, the way other kids carried pencils and erasers. Wow, that's a good comparison. So this kid carries all this stuff around to make spitballs, just like other kids carry things that they need for school. So he really isn't painting a good picture. Ryan does seem like a kind of troublemaker and a bully. "Do you see that?" the teacher demanded of Gregory again. "Yes, Mrs. Wessex." "What is it?" Gregory's dark face turned darker. "A spitball." "Disgusting," Mrs. Wessex informed him. "I didn't do it," Gregory repeated with an intense sense of his own innocence. "Young man, I believe you did." "I didn't," Gregory protested. "Then who did?" she asked. Gregory made a half turn toward the class. Though he could sense other kids suppressing laughter at his plight, he felt they were on his side. Interesting. So people are starting to kind of laugh a little bit, but they're trying to hold back the laughter at his plight, his unpleasant situation, at the struggle he's going through. He felt they were on his side. Interesting. So he's kind of an outcast, but he feels they're on his side in this situation. As for Ryan, not only did Gregory observe his barely stifled grin, he noticed the bully's right fist balled up, a blatant threat that if Gregory dared to name him as culprit, the fist would be put to use. Oh boy, so if Gregory tells on Ryan, Ryan's threatening him, he's going to beat him up. "Gregory," Mrs. Wessex said, "I asked you a question. If you didn't do this disgusting thing, who did?" "I don't know," he replied, struggling to contain his sense of indignation. She had no right to blame him. "Mrs. Wessex," he suddenly blurted out, "how come you're always blaming me?" The class gasped. For a moment, but only a moment, Mrs. Wessex's face softened. Then she glared at him. "Gregory," she ordered, "go stand with your face in the shame corner for 15 minutes. "But I didn't do anything," Gregory protested again. On appeal, Mrs. Wessex said, 20 minutes. A giggle erupted from somewhere in the class. "Quiet!" Mrs. Wessex cried. Gregory, knowing that it would be useless to argue, shoved his hands back into his pockets and headed for the corner. Halfway there, he stopped. "Mrs. Wessex, what about my money?" "You may pick it up, then stand in the corner." This, from Mrs. Wessex, was a measure of kindness. Wow. So she's usually really mean. If she's, letting him pick up his money is kindness from her. Hearing the suppressed snickers of his classmates. Ooh, suppressed snickers. Wow. You can almost hear it. Those are like kind of laughing, right? Suppressed snickers. Trying to hold them in. That's really good alliteration. Gregory picked up the coins. When he finally got into the shame corner, he was hot, upset, and angry. I don't know if they mean temperature. I think they mean hot. Like when you get hot, it means you're like hot-headed. You're kind of mad. You're really, really got something on your mind. You've got a lot of emotions. Mrs. Wessex was so unfair, he kept thinking. Staring into the corner, he vowed that this time he would have revenge. During recess, a bunch of kids gathered around him. "How come she picks on you?" Susan asked. "I don't know," Gregory said, pleased that someone had noticed. "But I'm going to get back at her." "Yeah, sure you will," Ryan teased. "Smartest kid in the class does something wicked to the teacher. Sure, right." Ryan does not think Gregory's going to get any sort of revenge. He's also kind of picking on him for being smart, which is that's a jerk thing to do. Gregory looked at the circle of faces. His classmates were really paying attention to him. At the moment, he felt they really liked him. If only he could do something to keep their positive feelings. I am going to do something, he insisted. Everybody hear that? Ryan crowed. Gregory's going to get revenge on Wessex. Man, said Dory, you do that, you'll be the hero of the whole class. Wow. So they think he's going to get revenge on this mean teacher. He's going to be the hero. Hero of the whole class. The words filled Gregory with excitement. He looked at Dory and smiled. Here was his opportunity. He would have his revenge and become a hero, too. Uh-oh. What do you think's going to happen? 2 blocks from the Kennedy Memorial Middle School, tucked between Jack's skate and snowboards and Robert's famous barbecue ribs, stood Mrs. Barman's candy store. You could buy any piece of candy for 5 cents. During most of the day, the candy store had modest sales. Modest means kind of limited. Between the hours of 3 and 4:30, it was packed with kids. What can you infer from that? Oh, that school gets out at 3, right? 3 o'clock or something like that. Kids are going to the store after school. The display case contained 52 white plastic trays of candy, from black crows to clear jelly beans to white peppermints, and all colors and flavors in between. Behind the display case stood Mrs. Barman. She was a small old woman whose marshmallow-colored face, arms, and torso, which means the middle part of your body, seemed to be all there was of her. If she had a lower body, no one had ever seen it. Probably because she stands behind the counter all day, right? That's kind of funny. That's a good description there. Marshmallow-colored face, arms, and torso. She's very pale. Probably also really squishy if she's like a marshmallow. Kids asked for candy by pointing and saying 1 or 2. Mrs. Barman counted out the candy pieces and put them in a small white paper sack. 15 cents, she'd say. The price was all she normally spoke. It was to Mrs. Barman's that Gregory went after school. When it was his turn, the old lady gave him an inquiring look. It means a questioning look. I want to speak to Tiny, Gregory announced. Tiny was Mrs. Barman's son. If he was asked the proper way, he would sell you fireworks. Selling fireworks was illegal. Uh-oh. I was trying to think about maybe what Gregory is planning for his revenge. Tiny, Mrs. Barman shouted. Kids to see ya! Gregory waited nervously. He had never spoken to Tiny before, and he was only remembering what some kid told him to do. He hoped he asked the right way. One of the things the kid had told him was, you gotta ask right, or Tiny won't sell you nothing. Tiny, as big as a grizzly bear. Ooh, that's interesting. That's actually called juxtaposition, putting those two opposite things together. Tiny, big as a grizzly bear, lumbered out of the back room. He had a large, glistening, bald head, an incredibly thick neck, a belly so huge it was on the verge of splitting the plaid shirt he always wore. No one had ever seen him smile. The kids had all kinds of stories about Tiny. Some said he had played professional football. Others said his size was due to the fact he ate nothing but his mother's candy. Then there were those who claimed Mrs. Barman lost her bottom half because Tiny had blown it away with his fireworks. You want me, kid? Tiny said to Gregory. His voice was low, rumbling. Crackers, Gregory said, hoping he had remembered the password correctly. Tiny looked hard at Gregory, then glanced around to make sure no fire marshal was lurking among the clamorous crowd of children. Ooh, that's some good alliteration there, too. Clamorous means very loud, confusing. Clamorous crowd of children. And a fire marshal is like a kind of like a police officer, but for fire, right? Making sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to. Kind of like the fire department guy. Definitely would get in trouble if you were selling fireworks illegally. That guy would come after you. Follow me, he growled. Gregory followed Tiny down a narrow, dark passageway into a small room whose walls were covered with metal drawers. A low wattage bulb dangled from flimsy ceiling wires. Low wattage means it's really dim. It's not very bright. Gregory looked about. It was all so creepy, he began to wish he hadn't come. What do you want? Tiny asked. Gregory, fist clenched, said, a stink bomb and a smoke bomb. Ooh. Tiny studied Gregory anew. What you gonna do with them? After a moment, Gregory said, put them in my teacher's house. Tiny's face unfolded into a smile. I hate teachers, he said. The smile vanished. 75 cents each, he said. Gregory laboriously, which means took a lot of time and effort, counted out the quarters, nickels, dimes, and pennies into Tiny's huge hands. And 25 cents, Tiny added, for the government tax. Gregory handed over the surcharge. Surcharge means a charge on top of something else. So there's a normal price and then the surcharge. The large man opened 2 metal drawers and extracted or took out 2 small tubes, each as thick as his thumbs. Frizzy gray fuses. Ooh, that's like good alliteration there too. Frizzy gray fuses protruded from their ends. A fuse is the part that you light on a firework. It's like a candle wick. One tube was black and bore a label that read Super Skunk. The other tube was a bright orange color and was called Cloud of Darkness. Okay, kid, where do you get that stuff? Gregory struggled to recall the proper reply. Some kid, he said. Don't you forget, Tiny said. So Tiny's kind of giving him like, all right, where'd you get it? Gregory's like, some kid. So that's the proper code. Where'd you get this? You just say some kid. You don't tell that Tiny gave them to you. That's why he said, don't you forget, Tiny said. Turning Gregory around with his big hands, he pushed him out of the room, but not before he whispered, go get your teacher. That is part 1. I'm going to pause here and add a second video so that you can read the second half of this separately if you want.